Hello everyone, and welcome to Nature Explorer. Today, we're beginning an unforgettable journey through one of the most fascinating travel classics ever written, A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains by Isabella L. Bird. First published in 1879, this remarkable book is based on the author's real experiences as she explored the breathtaking Rocky Mountains of Colorado. Through her vivid descriptions, you'll discover towering peaks, peaceful forests, wild rivers, and the adventurous spirit of the American frontier. So, sit back, relax, and let your imagination travel into the heart of nature. Let's begin. A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains by Isabella L. Bird. Lake Tahoe, September 2nd. I have found a dream of beauty at which one might look all one's life and sigh. Not lovable, like the Sandwich Islands, but beautiful in its own way. A strictly North American beauty, snow-splotched mountains, huge pines, redwoods, sugar pines, silver spruce, a crystalline atmosphere, waves of the richest color, and a pine-hung lake which mirrors all beauty on its surface. Lake Tahoe is before me, a sheet of water 22 miles long by 10 broad, and in some places 1,700 feet deep. It lies at a height of 6,000 feet, and the snow-crowned summits which wall it in are from 8,000 to 11,000 feet in altitude. The air is keen and elastic. There is no sound but the distant and slightly musical ring of the lumber's axe. It is a weariness to go back, even in thought, to the clang of San Francisco, which I left in its cold morning fog early yesterday, driving to the Oakland Ferry through streets with sidewalks heaped with thousands of cantaloupe and watermelons, tomatoes, cucumbers, squashes, pears, grapes, peaches, apricots, all of startling size as compared with any I ever saw before. Other streets were piled with sacks of flour, left out all night, owing to the security from rain at this season. I pass hastily over the early part of the journey, the crossing the bay in a fog as chill as November, the number of lunch baskets, which gave the car the look of conveying a great picnic party, the last view of the Pacific, on which I had looked for nearly a year, the fierce sunshine and brilliant sky inland, the look of long RANLESSNESS, which one may not call drought, the valleys with sides crimson with the poison oak, the dusty vineyards, with great purple clusters thick among the leaves, and between the vines great dusty melons lying on the dusty earth. From off the boundless harvest fields the grain was carried in June, and it is now stacked in sacks along the track, awaiting freightage. California is a land flowing with milk and honey. The barns are bursting with fullness. In the dusty orchards the apple and pear branches are supported, that they may not break down under the weight of fruit. Melons, tomatoes, and squashes of gigantic size lie almost unheeded on the ground. Fat cattle, gorged almost to repletion, shade themselves under the oaks. Superb red horses shine, not with grooming, but with condition, and thriving farms everywhere show on what a solid basis the prosperity of the Golden State is founded. Very uninviting, however rich, was the blazing Sacramento Valley, and very repulsive the city of Sacramento, which, at a distance of 125 miles from the Pacific, has an elevation of only 30 feet. The mercury stood at 103 degrees in the shade, and the fine white dust was stifling. In the late afternoon we began the ascent of the Sierras, whose saw-like points had been in sight for many miles. The dusty fertility was all left behind. The country became rocky and gravelly, and deeply scored by streams bearing the muddy wash of the mountain gold mines down to the muddier Sacramento. There were long broken ridges and deep ravines, the ridges becoming longer, the ravines deeper, the pines thicker and larger, as we ascended into a cool atmosphere of exquisite purity, and before 6 p.m. the last traces of cultivation and the last hardwood trees were left behind. 1. In consequence of the unobserved omission of a date to my letters having been pointed out to me, I take this opportunity of stating that I traveled in Colorado in the autumn and early winter of 1873 on my way to England from the Sandwich Islands. The letters are a faithful picture of the country and state of society as it then was, But friends who have returned from the West within the last 6 months tell me that things are rapidly changing, that the frame house is replacing the log cabin, and that the footprints of elk and bighorn may be sought for in vain on the dewy slopes of Estes Park. At Colfax, a station at a height of 2,400 feet, I got out and walked the length of the train. First came two great gaudy engines, the Grizzly Bear and the White Fox, with their respective tenders loaded with logs of wood, the engines with great, solitary, reflecting lamps in front above the cow guards, a quantity of polished brasswork, comfortable glass houses, and well-stuffed seats for the engine drivers. The engines and tenders were succeeded by a baggage car, the latter loaded with bullion and valuable parcels, and in charge of two express agents. Each of these cars is 45 feet long. Then came two cars loaded with peaches and grapes, then two Silver Palace cars, each 60 feet long, then a smoking car, at that time occupied mainly by Chinamen, and then 5 ordinary passenger cars, with platforms like all the others, making altogether a train about 700 feet in length. The platforms of the 4 front cars were clustered over with Digger Indians, with their squaws, children, and gear. They are perfect savages, without any aptitude for even aboriginal civilization, and are altogether the most degraded of the ill-fated tribes which are dying out before the white races. They were all very diminutive, 5 feet 1 inch being, I should think, about the average height, with flat noses, wide mouths, and black hair cut straight above the eyes and hanging lank and long at the back and sides. The squaws wore their hair thickly plastered with pitch, and a broad band of the same across their noses and cheeks. They carried their infants on their backs, strapped to boards. The clothing of both sexes was a ragged, dirty combination of coarse woolen cloth and hide, the moccasins being unornamented. They were all hideous and filthy, and swarming with vermin. The men carried short bows and arrows, one of them, who appeared to be the chief, having a lynx's skin for a quiver. A few had fishing tackle, but the bystanders said that they lived almost entirely upon grasshoppers. They were a most impressive incongruity in the midst of the tokens of an omnipotent civilization. The light of the sinking sun from that time glorified the Sierras, and as the dew fell, aromatic odors made the still air sweet. On a single track, sometimes carried on a narrow ledge excavated from the mountainside by men lowered from the top in baskets, overhanging ravines from 2,000 to 3,000 feet deep, the monster train snaked its way upwards, stopping sometimes in front of a few frame houses, at others where nothing was to be seen but a log cabin with a few Chinamen hanging about it, but where trails on the sides of the ravines pointed to a gold country above and below. So sharp and frequent are the curves on some parts of the ascent, that on looking out of the window one could seldom see more than a part of the train at once. At Cape Horn, where the track curves round the ledge of a precipice 2,500 feet in depth, it is correct to be frightened, and a fashion of holding the breath and shutting the eyes prevails, but my fears were reserved for the crossing of a trestle bridge over a very deep chasm, which is itself approached by a sharp curve. This bridge appeared to be overlapped by the cars, so as to produce the effect of looking down directly into a wild gulch, with a torrent raging along it at an immense depth below. Shivering in the keen, frosty air near the summit pass of the Sierras, we entered the snow sheds, wooden galleries, which for about 50 miles shut out all the splendid views of the region, as given in dioramas, not even allowing a glimpse of the gem of the Sierras, the lovely Donner Lake. One of these sheds is 27 miles long. In a few hours the mercury had fallen from 103 degrees to 29 degrees, and we had ascended 6,987 feet in 105 miles. After passing through the sheds, we had several grand views of a pine forest on fire before reaching Truckee at 11 p.m., having traveled 258 miles. Truckee, the center of the lumbering region of the Sierras, is usually spoken of as a rough mountain town, and Mr. W. had told me that all the roughs of the district congregated there, that there were nightly pistol affrays in bar-rooms, etc., but as he admitted that a lady was sure of respect, and Mr. G. strongly advised me to stay and see the lakes, I got out, much dazed, and very stupid with sleep, envying the people in the sleeping car who were already unconscious on their luxurious couches. The cars drew up in a street, if street that could be called, which was only a wide, cleared space, intersected by rails, with here and there a stump, and great piles of sawn logs bulking big in the moonlight, and a number of irregular clapboard, steep-roofed houses, many of them with open fronts, glaring with light and crowded with men. We had pulled up at the door of a rough Western hotel, with a partially open front, being a barroom crowded with men drinking and smoking, and the space between it and the cars was a moving mass of loafers and passengers. On the tracks, engines, tolling heavy bells, were mightily moving, the glare from their cyclopean eyes dulling the light of a forest which was burning fitfully on a mountainside, and on open spaces great fires of pine logs were burning cheerily, with groups of men round them. A band was playing noisily, and the unholy sound of tom-toms was not far off. Mountains, the sierras of many a fireside dream, seemed to wall in the town, and great pines stood out, sharp and clear-cut, against a sky in which a moon and stars were shining frostily. It was a sharp frost at that great height, and when an irrepressible nigger, who seemed to represent the hotel establishment, deposited me and my carpet-bag in a room which answered for the parlor, I was glad to find some remains of pine knots still alight in the stove. A man came in and said that when the cars were gone he would try to get me a room, but they were so full that it would be a very poor one. The crowd was solely masculine. It was then 11:30 p.m., and I had not had a meal since 6 a.m., but when I asked hopefully for a hot supper with tea, I was told that no supper could be got at that hour. But in half an hour the same man returned with a small cup of cold, weak tea and a small slice of bread, which looked as if it had been much handled. I asked the Negro factotum about the hire of horses, and presently a man came in from the bar who, he said, could supply my needs. This man, the very type of a Western pioneer, bowed, threw himself into a rocking chair, drew a spittoon beside him, cut a fresh quid of tobacco, began to chew energetically, and put his feet, cased in miry high boots, into which his trousers were tucked, on the top of the stove. He said he had horses which would both lope and trot, that some ladies preferred the Mexican saddle, that I could ride alone in perfect safety, and after a route had been devised, I hired a horse for 2 days. This man wore a pioneer's badge as one of the earliest settlers of California, but he had moved on as one place after another had become too civilized for him. But nothing, he added, was likely to change much in Truckee. I was afterwards told that the usual regular hours of sleep are not observed there. The accommodation is too limited for the population of 2,000, which is masculine mainly, and is liable to frequent temporary additions, and beds are occupied continuously, though by different occupants, throughout the greater part of the 24 hours. Consequently, I found the bed and room allotted to me quite tumbled-looking. Men's coats and sticks were hanging up, miry boots were littered about, and a rifle was in one corner. There was no window to the outer air, but I slept soundly, being only once awoke by an increase of the same din in which I had fallen asleep, varied by 3 pistol shots fired in rapid succession.